I was thinking a lot about this earlier today, about just the absurdity of having a militaristic foreign policy. Of course, that goes for the U.S. In today's day and age, we are the most militaristic country by far. But even just other countries throughout history, just the idea of militarism in general. Somebody said to me right now on Twitter, if we spend as much money on science as we did on militarization, we would have colonized fucking Pluto by now. And also, think about how terribly counterproductive fighting is in every way, shape, and form. It doesn't solve anything. But then that's where the Alex Jonesy side starts to come out of me. And look, believe me, I'm not on the Alex Jones page with 90% of things. But you start to think like, well, hold on. They know that, right? The people who are making these war decisions presumably know that this doesn't necessarily solve anything. So then why are they making the decisions? And then, of course, we get into the broader conversation about the military-industrial complex, and you can talk about Dwight Eisenhower and his farewell speech and how he said, look, the military-industrial complex is a tricky thing. You make a shitload of money when you go to war, and there's going to be a lot of people that are part of these corporations and who run the corporations who are going to want more war so they can make more money. Beware of that. Beware of that. And then you realize it's not even necessarily like a smoke-filled backroom conspiracy where everybody's just evil and nefarious. It's more that there are a bunch of moving parts, and the motivation or the incentive for a lot of people align. And then they can be in favor of war and start wars and then rationalize afterwards how it was the right thing to do and we should have done it and we are moral and we are just. And I've always mentioned on air that there are so many different interventions that the U.S. has done where you can make a good case for it, like in Bosnia and Kosovo, of course, World War II. Those are two examples of probably good interventions. You can talk about bombing ISIS to get the Yazidis off the mountain in Iraq, a religious minority who were being beheaded and persecuted. That's another good bombing. Now, the real reason might have been with ISIS because they're making $3 million a day worth of oil because they've taken over Syrian oil fields and Iraqi oil fields. And that's true, but that doesn't mean that the helping of the Yazidis wasn't a bad thing. So what we do is we use these best examples and then we rationalize the worst examples, like when we went into Iran and toppled Mohammad Mossadegh, the democratically elected government in Iran, and we said, no, we're going to put in our guy, the Shah, and he's going to help us out. When we toppled the government in Chile and all throughout South America, we basically did coups, funded terrorists to overthrow the governments, and then they would support us. I mean, that's where the term Banana Republic comes from. Chiquita Banana funded small military terrorist organizations in different South American countries, toppled the governments, and then went in and took the bananas. So we find ways to use moral relativism, or wherever there's a moral question, we say, well, we will be the good guys by definition and come in and fix the problem, even though the actual reasons may be more for profit and more for expanding the American empire and all that stuff. But in terms of how we should actually go about doing our foreign policy, the last thing I would do is military. Of course, the only time I would use the military is when there's imminent threat of attack against us and to use it for self-defense, right? But my foreign policy, if I was president, would consist of Wendy's, ESPN, Denzel Washington movies, Vicodin, and weed. And if you send those things around the world and you say, hey, courtesy of America, have some fun, there would be world peace in a year. Jimmy Dore makes this point all the time. He says, I don't think bombing has ever solved anything in human history. And, like, the Syria example is perfect. Assad's a really bad guy, and he's gassing kids, and he's killing people, and he's using chemical weapons. But then ISIS is bad, and they're the rebels. They're jihadists also. They'll behead people. FSA is okay. They're a rebel movement. They're relatively secular. Maybe we want them to win, but how can we be sure that they'll win, even if we arm them? And how can we be sure it gets in the right hand? I got the solution. Bomb people. Bomb everybody. But that's not a solution. That's not going to solve anything. But on the other hand, if everybody got some Wendy's, some ESPN, some Denzel Washington movies, some Vicodin and weed, that's how you change hearts and minds. Now, I'm partially being tongue-in-cheek, right? But I'm partially serious. We always talk about this idea of a culture war. Yeah, a culture war is real. there is always a culture war going on. And there are thousands of different ideologies and belief systems and ways of acting that exist around the world. Some based on religion, some based on cultures, some are more secular, some are based on technology, some are based on work cultures and your economic situation. And look, I honestly believe that a secular culture where you have access to things like entertainment and competition, ESPN, movies, and all that stuff, that's preferable. Music is preferable. It speaks to something within us. Movies are preferable. They speak to something within us, an artistic part of us. Okay? Having substances that can tweak your consciousness and alter your consciousness temporarily, that's preferable. Okay? So if you get people together under this banner of peace and happiness and joy, and you do that by using the good parts of America, Denzel Washington, ESPN, Wendy's, Vicodin, and weed, well, then everything will work out in the long run. I know it sounds silly. I know it sounds a very surface level argument, but in my personal experience, I know it's anecdotal. But anytime you give people access to those things I mentioned, they really fucking like it, and they're probably not gonna fight you.